Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of News Dose, where I keep you up to date with everything happening in the gaming world. And even though much of the world is at a bit of a standstill right now, we got a lot of gaming news to get through, and some pretty big news on top of that. We got some pretty major news for Xbox, PlayStation, as well as Nintendo. Xbox Series X has officially got all of its specs confirmed with new features, controller update, and more. I really cannot emphasize enough of this thing is an absolute beast. Then there is the Nintendo Switch, which may have just confirmed the heavily rumored Nintendo Direct for the month of March, and PlayStation is looking to make some big acquisitions. But before we get into all of that, I have a few small updates around the industry before we dive into those specs for the Xbox Series X. Don't worry though, I will try to make these as quick as possible, or you can just skip ahead in the video to probably around the 4-minute to possibly 5-minute mark where I talk about the Series X. Starting off though, Nintendo has officially announced that there will be a Nintendo Indie stream tomorrow on March 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time or 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It will be roughly 20 minutes long, and hopefully we get plenty of great independent games on the Switch. I think the Switch is an excellent console for independent games, and I'm curious to see what they show. I know they have Axiom Verge 2 coming, and I wouldn't really mind seeing that. I love the first one, so I'd like to see more in the sequel. There's also Hollow Knight 2, which I believe is supposed to come out sometime this year. Oh, and there's that Paper Mario clone, Bug Fables. That was supposed to launch sometime early this year for the Switch, so maybe that gets revealed there. I guess we'll wait and see, but one thing that I think that this announcement kind of says is that those leaks and rumors from last week were real. See, last week we were talking about an Indie Direct happening on the 17th, and then a more general Direct later on in the month talking about the big releases for the Switch in 2020. So the original leak from last week did have the Indie Direct on March 17th and the big Nintendo Direct on March 27th. So hey, the Nintendo Direct drought may finally be over, which is such a relief. I would love to know what's going on with Nintendo in 2020, and we might not have to wait for too much longer. In other news, we have another update for Call of Duty Warzone, and this is something we actually talked about last week. See, when Warzone launched last week, it opened with 6 million players within the first day, which is absolutely insane. In comparison, Apex Legends had 2.5 million players on its opening day, but by the end of the first week, it was at 25 million. And that's why I asked you all last week if you think Warzone can pass that 25 million mark within the first week. After all, Call of Duty is a massive franchise. Well, Warzone is certainly off to a fast start, as it has already passed 15 million players in its first 3 days, which in comparison, Apex was at 10 million in the same time frame. So we still haven't seen if it can eclipse that 25 million mark set by Apex, but all signs so far are pointing in that direction. If it does, we should be hearing about it by tomorrow or the day after. I'll certainly keep you updated, but let me know what you think. Can Call of Duty Warzone reach 25 million players within its first week? Regardless though, I've been hearing a lot of good things about Warzone, so as long as everybody's enjoying it, that's a good thing in my books. Moving on, we also have a small update for Monster Hunter Iceborne, which has officially shipped 5 million copies worldwide, and that now puts the entire series at over 62 million units sold. I guess it was a good weekend for sales numbers, but really it seems like Monster Hunter World just cannot be stopped. It's almost hard to believe how well this game has done, and it just keeps going. I mean, it was always a huge franchise over in Japan, and back during the PSP days, it was selling a ton over there. This really is the first time, though, it's seen this kind of success worldwide, but it's very well deserved. I think a lot of that is because you are seeing a big jump in visual quality, and being on home consoles, it's a really big deal outside of Japan. The number one thing though is that Monster Hunter World is a very high quality game. I just think a lot of people hadn't really been exposed to it before, but it being multi-platform on home consoles with a visual jump, people got to see what they were missing out on all along, and I'm really happy to see the franchise doing so well and Capcom being so successful here. And now with some of the small stuff out of the way, let's move on to what most of you all are probably here for, and that is the Xbox Series X, because Microsoft revealed a ton of information today about the Series X, which was very reminiscent of their last info dump for the Series X on a random Monday. The thing is, we got all of the specs now, we got some controller news, it looks like memory cards are returning, and we got some new Series X features with visual representation. Let's first take a look at the specs of this thing though, and wow, this thing truly is the power tower. Microsoft's hardware team here did a phenomenal job on not only the specs, but the way this thing was designed, which I'll get into here in just a moment. The specs though, we already knew the Series X was confirmed to have 12 teraflops of GPU power and was based off of Radeon A2 architecture. We now, however, know everything else. Its processor has 8 Zen 2 cores clocked at 3.8 GHz, which is absolutely massive. And that really is the key component on why we will be seeing games run at 60 frames per second next generation. Don't get me wrong, the 12 teraflops of GPU power is really exciting because that's just raw power. And it'll be interesting to see what developers can do with that type of power, but the CPU, I think this will be the thing that people notice almost immediately because games are just going to run much better thanks to the huge increase with the processor. I play a lot of games on my PC. Maybe not so much in the last year or so, but I can tell you the number one biggest difference for me going from PC to console is frame rate. 30 frames really does feel sluggish, so I'm excited about the processor here, and yeah, it's a well-balanced console. Moving on though, the Xbox Series X does have 16 GB of DDR6 RAM, a 4K ultra high def Blu-ray drive, and another exciting component to this thing is the 1TB NVMe solid state drive. Now the CPU may be the most noticeable thing when it comes to the gameplay, but it's the solid state drive that will be the first major change from this generation that you will notice because there will no longer be long wait times to play games. Team Xbox actually showed a visual representation of their new solid state drive for the Series X against the Xbox One X, playing State of Decay 2, and when you see them running side by side, it gives you that wow factor. State of Decay 2 on the Series X boots up in about 8 seconds, which is stunningly fast, versus the Xbox One X, which clocked at around 50 seconds. So there is a massive jump there. You're no longer going to be sitting around just waiting for a game to start, playing on your phone, posting on Twitter, or whatever it is that you do during these long load sequences. I don't really think it's like a groundbreaking achievement, but I do think that developers will be able to make use of faster load times on consoles, even when it comes to gameplay. With that said though, there is 2 things about this demo that I want to make note of. The first of which is, yes, the Xbox Series X looks to bring back memory cards. Now, I know they're not really calling them memory cards, but you have to admit, it looks a lot like a memory card. Either way, you will be able to buy proprietary expandable memory to place in the back of your Series X. And I know you're probably wondering why it's proprietary and that you can't just put any solid state drive you want into the Series X. From my understanding, that is because the Series X is using an extremely fast solid state drive, which is better than most PCs have even today, and you're going to want that type of memory when slotting it into your Series X. And what I mean by that is you're going to want the same type of memory that the Series X already has. For me, I don't really think that's that big of a deal to have a proprietary expandable hard drive as long as they don't make the memory absurdly overpriced, like kind of what happened with the PlayStation Vita. As long as they can keep that from happening, then we're good to go. As for the other notable thing here though, is that the Xbox backwards compatibility team is at it once again. We saw the backwards compatible team do incredible work with the Xbox One this generation, getting several Xbox 360 and even the original Xbox games to work on the Xbox One, several of which were enhanced versions at no extra cost, and the team once again is doing similar things with the Series X. That's right, select games will have Series X enhancements, including Gears 5. I also don't think it was a coincidence that the loading demos that they showed was games like State of Decay 2 and Hellblade. I don't think that there's any confirmations on this just yet, but I would expect both of those games to get some Series X enhancements. Really though, it was this next bit of information that I found intriguing though, and that's because they said the Series X would, in theory, be able to make any backwards compatible game have HDR. That would be a really big deal too. This includes all generations of Xbox, and Digital Foundry, used the example of Fusion Frenzy and Halo 5 Guardians using this feature to implement HDR. This is done by machine learning, and it could be implemented without the input of developers even. That also goes for 4K enhancements, which can be done without the developer needing to do any extra work. Gears Ultimate Edition, for example, was running in 4K without any extra work by the developer. I mean, that all sounds incredible on paper, though I will need to hear more from Microsoft on that one. Hopefully it is true. They also showed the quick resume feature where they were hopping in and out of games within seconds to play, and then once they booted back into that game, it was exactly where they last suspended the game. You apparently should be able to suspend 3 Xbox Series X games at one time, but according to Digital Foundry, you can suspend more than that if they're backwards compatible games. That's a pretty nice feature, especially for somebody like me who juggles multiple games at once. Even this last weekend I was playing Ori, I was playing ReCore, as well as Final Fantasy VI. Granted, that last one was not on my Xbox. Even so, I'm also playing Yakuza 0 and Lost Odyssey on my Xbox, so it would be pretty cool juggling them all at once. They also showed off the new controller for the Series X, though it's not really a major difference than what we're already used to. It looks a tad bit smaller than the current Xbox One controller, though that's kind of hard to tell from the pictures alone, but there was a few new additions to the Series X controller. They added textured triggers and made the bumpers a little bit more prominent. They also added a dedicated share button, which is in the center of the controller, which was very much needed. That is one of those things that the PlayStation 4 controller had that I thought was a good idea that just never made it into the Xbox One. It also had a hybrid D-pad disc, which is similar to the Elite controller series, and let me tell you, that is an improvement over the typical D-pad, and I'll explain why. If you play fighting games, and if you use the D-pad as I do, then doing quarter circle movements is much easier using this hybrid D-pad. Nonetheless though, the Series X controller isn't majorly different than the current Xbox One controller, which in my opinion is a good thing, but it does have some small refinements to it. It's also supposed to have improved latency along with the current Xbox One controllers, which will get an update for the Series X. Either way though, the Xbox Series X truly sounds like a beast, and we are starting to understand why it was designed the way it was. It is a bit bigger than current generation consoles, but when you're compacting this much power in a machine, I completely understand why. You have those huge fans on this console to keep it super quiet. I even like how this thing is put together. Each component on the inside just stacks on top of one another, and then you just slide it into the chassis. It's pretty cool really. I wasn't actually expecting them to show the inside. PlayStation has only showed their logo. They haven't shown anything. And Xbox is already showing the innards of the console. Now we really just need the price for this thing, and based off the specs, I really would not be surprised to see this thing north of $500. If they manage to get this thing to $500, that is a huge sell, but we'll have to wait and see. Let me ask you though, how much would you be willing to spend for the Series X if you're on the market to get one? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on, we also got some big news for the PlayStation because this weekend there was a pretty big leak that has Sony working on a Silent Hills project with the original team, Project Siren, and Sony Japan. Now this is supposed to be a reboot, and for Silent Hill fans, I'm sure that's already really exciting, but it does get better because apparently Sony is also trying to revive PT and bring back Kojima to work on it. Now that would be a pretty big deal because people loved the PT demo. It had a lot of potential, but unfortunately it did get cancelled, and Hideo Kojima parted ways with Konami shortly after. The PT Revival, though, is being proposed as a next-generation virtual reality title with an episodic release schedule similar to games like Life is Strange. I know that probably doesn't make everybody happy, but honestly, VR games and horror, they fit perfectly with one another. I also think it would be kind of cool to see what Kojima could do with a VR headset. He's certainly very creative and could make something truly special for PlayStation VR. Now, obviously, Hideo Kojima and Konami do not get along too well, so Sony will probably have to find a way to pitch this, because I'm not convinced Konami would be willing to do this. And that's the thing, Jack of all controllers, they're saying that their sources are telling them that Sony is trying to acquire the Metal Gear Solid franchise as well as Castlevania from Konami. I really don't know about all of that because I'm not seeing anybody else really reporting on that, and I don't think it would be too likely for Konami to sell a franchise like Castlevania. They literally just released Symphony of the Night on mobile phones, and they just released a third season for the Castlevania animated series on Netflix. I just can't imagine they would sell the franchise to Sony because, they're using it right now. We'll see on that one though, but either way, Silent Hill's returning with a soft reboot and PT possibly being revived. That sounds pretty cool to me. Anyways though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Peace out.